You wake up before your alarm again. Not because you're rested, because your body has forgotten how to trust stillness. The room is quiet. The world hasn't asked anything of you yet. But already, there's that familiar weight pressing against your chest. Not panic. Not sadness exactly. Just heaviness. The kind that lives in your bones now. You've been called strong your entire life. Reliable, unshakable, the one people lean on when everything else falls apart. And you've worn that label like armor, because someone had to. But here's what no one tells you about being the strong one. Strength, when it becomes your only language, stops being a choice. It becomes a cage. You are strong, but you are also exhausted in a way sleep can't fix. This isn't about working too hard or needing a vacation. This is about something deeper, something that's been quietly eroding you from the inside for years. It's the exhaustion of holding yourself together when you never learned it was safe to fall apart. The fatigue of being everyone's foundation while your own ground crumbles beneath you. The invisible toll of carrying weight you never agreed to carry, but couldn't figure out how to put down. Here's the paradox at the center of your experience. The very thing that allowed you to survive, your strength, your capacity to endure, your ability to keep going, has become the thing that's slowly suffocating you. You built yourself into a fortress, and now you're locked inside it. This is the psychology of people who are strong but emotionally tired. And if you recognize yourself in these words, what you're about to understand will change everything. Let's be precise about what we're really talking about here. Emotional exhaustion in the chronically strong isn't weakness wearing a mask. It's the long-term consequence of emotional hypervigilance, a state where your nervous system never fully rests because it was trained, often in childhood, that safety depends on your constant readiness. You learned early that your value was tied to your capacity. Your worthiness was measured by how much you could handle without breaking. This often begins with a phenomenon psychologists call parentification, a developmental distortion where a child is forced, implicitly or explicitly, to take on emotional or practical responsibilities far beyond their years. Maybe you became the mediator in your parents' conflicts. Maybe you were the emotional caretaker for a depressed mother or an absent father. Maybe you just learned that your needs were secondary, that asking for help was burdening others, that the only safe role was the strong one. What happens neurologically is profound. Your developing brain adapts to threat by staying in a chronic state of activation. The default mode network, the part of your brain responsible for rest, self-reflection, and integration, becomes underutilized. Instead, your amygdala, your threat detection center, stays hypersensitive, always scanning for the next problem to solve, the next crisis to manage, the next person to rescue. You become, in essence, a nervous system that can't differentiate between actual danger and the absence of productivity. This creates what attachment theorists call avoidant attachment patterns in adulthood. Not because you don't want connection, but because you learned that dependence equals danger. Vulnerability became synonymous with collapse. So you built your identity around self-sufficiency, around never needing, around being the giver but never the receiver. The strong one, always. But here's what the psychological literature makes abundantly clear. Chronic self-reliance is often a trauma response masquerading as a personality trait. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile because they threaten our constructed identity. For the chronically strong, the shadow isn't anger or darkness, it's softness, it's need. It's the parts of you that are still a child, who wanted to be held, who wanted someone else to be strong so you could finally rest. You've been running from your own tenderness for so long, you've forgotten it's even there. This isn't about demonizing strength. Strength is beautiful. Resilience is valuable. But when strength becomes compulsory, when it's no longer a resource but a requirement for your sense of self, it stops serving you. It starts consuming you. The cost of this kind of strength is rarely visible. There are no scars people can see, no diagnosis that captures it fully. Just a quiet erosion of something essential, a kind of invisible grief. You grieve the childhood you spent being an adult, the moments you performed stability while drowning inside, the relationships where you were everything to someone who never thought to ask what you needed. You grieve the permission you never gave yourself to be tired, to be confused, to be anything other than composed. And the fear underneath all of it, it's not the fear of failure, it's the fear of irrelevance. Because if you're not strong, if you're not useful, if you're not holding it together, then who are you? What's left? Your identity became so fused with your function that rest feels like erasure. Vulnerability feels like disintegration. This is what the Stoic philosopher Seneca warned about when he said, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." Your strength deceived you. It convinced you that you were limitless, that you didn't need what others needed, that you were exempt from the basic human requirement for support, for softness, for being held. And now, years later, you're paying the price for that deception. The exhaustion you feel isn't just physical, it's existential. It's the fatigue of performing invincibility while your inner world quietly collapses. It's the weight of being strong for so long that you've forgotten how to be real. You've learned to say "I'm fine" as a reflex. You've mastered the art of deflection, of shifting focus to others, of making your presence about what you provide rather than who you are. And in the process, you've become unreachable, even to yourself. Every act of kindness you offer is genuine, but it's also a fortification. Every time you show up for someone else, part of you is saying, "See? I'm valuable. I matter. You need me." Because the alternative, being needed for nothing, offering nothing, feels like vanishing. The philosopher Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." But for you, the dragon isn't external. It's the internal demand that you must always be strong, that rest is weakness, that needing makes you a burden. And until you face that dragon, you'll keep running, exhausted, isolated, and quietly breaking. So, what does this actually look like in your everyday life? How does this pattern show up once you're no longer a child, but an adult navigating a world that demands even more? You might find yourself in relationships where you're always the emotional anchor. You're the listener, the fixer, the steady one. But when it's your turn to speak, to need, to ask, something freezes inside you. You tell yourself they wouldn't understand, or they have their own problems, or it's just easier to handle it alone. Intimacy becomes conditional. You'll let people close, but not all the way in. You give access to your competence, but guard your chaos. You might become the person who overfunctions at work, not because you're ambitious in the healthy sense, but because stopping feels dangerous. You take on more projects, volunteer for extra shifts, become indispensable. Because if you're essential, you're safe. If you're producing, you're justified. Rest, in this framework, feels like laziness, even when you're running on empty. You might struggle with self-worth that's entirely performance-based. Your value calculus is simple. I am worth loving when I am useful. I am worth keeping when I am low maintenance. I deserve care when I've earned it through output. The idea that you might be inherently worthy just for existing, just for being, feels abstract, inaccessible, almost naive. You might have rigid boundaries around your own needs, but weak boundaries around others' demands. You can say no to taking a break, to asking for help, to resting, but saying no to someone else's request feels selfish, cold, wrong. Your bandwidth for others is infinite. Your bandwidth for yourself is non-existent. You might experience a profound disconnection from your own emotional landscape. You can read a room instantly. You know when someone else is off. But when someone asks how you are, there's a strange blankness. Not because you're hiding, because you genuinely don't know. You've been so focused outward for so long, your internal world has become foreign territory. You might find that anger is the only emotion you allow yourself fully. Not because you're an angry person, but because anger feels active. Anger feels strong. Sadness, on the other hand, feels like collapse. Grief feels like giving up. So you transmute everything, disappointment, hurt, loneliness, into frustration and to irritation, into a sharp edge that keeps you moving instead of falling. Here's what's important to understand. These aren't personality flaws. These are adaptations. They're the behaviors of a nervous system that learns survival through self-sufficiency. They're the coping mechanisms of someone who never had the luxury of being fragile. But adaptation isn't the same as thriving, and this is where the work begins. The first step isn't fixing yourself. It's witnessing yourself. It's noticing the pattern without judgment. It's recognizing that the exhaustion you feel isn't a sign of weakness. It's your body and mind finally saying, "This is too much. This has always been too much. And you deserve to put it down. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're tired. And that's not a character flaw. It's an honest signal that something needs to change." So, how do you begin to unlearn something that's been keeping you alive? First, you have to accept a truth that might feel dangerous. You are allowed to be soft. Not just in theory, not just when you've earned it, but right now, in this moment, exactly as you are. Healing starts with reparenting yourself. This isn't metaphorical self-care. This is the actual practice of speaking to the part of you that never got to be a child. The part that had to grow up too fast, that carried too much, that learned to suppress need in order to survive. You sit with that younger version of yourself, and you say the things no one said back then. You don't have to be strong right now. You don't have to have it figured out. I'm here, and you're safe, and you can rest. Second, you reclaim your nervous system through regulation practices. Your body is stuck in a chronic state of activation. You need to teach it, slowly and gently, that stillness isn't danger. This looks like breath work, like somatic therapy, like intentional moments of doing nothing, not as laziness, but as radical rebellion against a system that taught you your value is your output. Third, you practice shadow integration. You stop running from your tenderness. You stop exiling the parts of you that feel weak. You bring them into the light, and you recognize needing support isn't a flaw. Asking for help isn't a burden. Being seen in your vulnerability isn't pathetic, it's human. And the people who truly love you don't love you for your strength. They love you despite the war you've built with it. Fourth, you start choosing softness as an act of courage. You let someone else hold the weight for once. You ask for what you need, even if your voice shakes. You say, "I'm not okay," instead of, "I'm fine." You let yourself be held, metaphorically and literally, by people who have earned your trust. And you notice that the world doesn't end, that you don't disappear, that being human doesn't make you less, it makes you whole. The poet and philosopher David Whyte said, "The antidote to exhaustion isn't rest, it's wholeheartedness. And wholeheartedness requires that you stop fragmenting yourself into the parts you show and the parts you hide. It requires that you stop performing strength and start living honesty." This journey isn't about becoming weak. It's about becoming integrated. It's about recognizing that your capacity to endure is beautiful, but it was never supposed to be the entirety of who you are. You are allowed to be strong and tired, capable and in need, resilient and deserving of gentleness. The goal isn't to be fixed. The goal is to become whole. And whole means all of it. The strength and the weariness, the competence and the confusion, the armor and the wound beneath it. All of it belongs. All it is you. If this resonated, I want you to know you're not alone in this. There are so many of us walking the same path, people who spent their lives being strong because they had no other choice, and who are now learning, slowly, that they deserve more than survival. They deserve peace. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if these conversations matter to you. And most importantly, be gentle with yourself today. You've been carrying the world for too long. It's okay to finally put it down. You're not too much. You're not a burden. And your worth was never contingent on how much you could endure. You're enough. You always have been.